My name is Maya Carter, 30 years old, and I am a cybersecurity expert. It's not an easy field to navigate, especially when I chose this path at a young age. But looking back, I realize this is where I truly belong. Today, I'm not just someone working in the tech industry, I'm someone who has mastered it. The cyber world, with its invisible threats and destructive attacks, is my playing field. Every day, I solve problems that most people don't even understand, protecting the most crucial systems in the country, ensuring no one can breach the walls I've built. I've spent most of my youth learning, honing, and growing in an industry that not everyone can pursue, especially coming from a family where everyone saw my future tied to my father's real estate business. To them, technology was something foreign and incomprehensible. But I didn't need them to understand. I only needed to prove to myself that I was doing the right thing, because I knew the work I was doing had the power to change the nation. 7 years. That's how long I've been away. 7 years of running from the judgment and disdain of my family, 7 years of proving myself in a world that didn't know my name. But today, I'm back. Not because I want to be, but because it's time for them to see who I've become. The road stretches out in front of me, the familiar gravel and cracked asphalt of my hometown, leading me through the harsh, dry landscape of New Mexico. The sun beats down relentlessly, casting long shadows across the dusty earth. As I drive, I feel the weight of this place pressing down on me. It's the same road, the same scenery, the same air that's thick with dust and heat. But everything is different for me. I'm not the same girl who left here all those years ago. I've changed, grown stronger, more confident, more capable than anyone here could ever imagine. I lower the window, letting the warm wind rush in, carrying the scent of dry earth and sagebrush. It's a smell that fills me with memories, memories of a time when I was desperate to leave this town, desperate to escape the suffocating expectations of my family. As I drive past the familiar old houses, the ones that look just as tired and weathered as they did when I was a kid, I realize that nothing has changed here. The streets are still empty, the houses still broken and dilapidated, stuck in time. But I'm not the same, and today they'll see that. As I pull into the driveway of my childhood home, the same sense of nostalgia hits me, but this time there's a difference. It's like stepping back into a place that no longer belongs to me, a place that holds no claim over who I am today. The front porch creaks under my feet as I walk up to the door. The house feels cold, almost unwelcoming. The familiar smell of dust and old wood fills my lungs, reminding me of all the years I spent trapped in this place, suffocating under the weight of their expectations. I push open the door and step inside. Nothing has changed. The same worn furniture, the same faded family photos lining the hallway, all of it frozen in time. My parents' world is still the same, a world where I was never good enough. I see the photos of Ethan, my brother, always smiling, always the favorite. There's not a single photo of me in my military uniform, not a single trace of the accomplishments I've made over the years. But there is no need to remind myself of that. I know what I've achieved, and they'll know, too, soon enough. I walk into the kitchen where my mother stands, her back turned as she chops vegetables. She doesn't even glance up when I walk in. "You're back, Maya," she says, her voice flat and uninterested. It's the same greeting I've gotten every time I've returned home. It's as if I'm just another part of the furniture, something that's expected to be there but doesn't really matter. No warmth, no welcome. Just a simple acknowledgement that I've returned to the place that never felt like home. My father is sitting at the kitchen table, eyes glued to his phone, not even looking up when I walk in. This is the same scene I've seen countless times before. Ethan is nowhere to be seen. He's busy with his life, his career, his success. The family's golden boy, the one they always praised, the one they expected to take over the family business. And then there's me, the one they always thought would never amount to anything. I stand there for a moment, absorbing the silence, the coldness of their indifference. It doesn't hurt anymore. I'm not that girl anymore. I've proven to myself, and to the world, that I am capable of more than they ever thought I could be. But today, I'll show them just how far I've come. I'm not the failure they thought I was. I'm Maya Carter, and I've made a name for myself. A name they'll have to respect. I look around the kitchen, at the same old faded curtains, the cracked tiles on the floor. Everything here is the same, but I'm not. I don't need their approval anymore. I've achieved more than they could ever understand. And today, I will show them. I will show them that the path I chose was the right one. I don't need them to acknowledge me. I don't need them to validate my success. But I will make them see that I've become something they never thought possible. As I climb the stairs to my old bedroom, the same room where I used to lie awake at night, wondering if I would ever be good enough, I stop for a moment. The walls are covered with trophies from high school, college awards, all the things I did to make them proud. But there are no medals from my time in the military, no photos of me in uniform, nothing to show for the years I spent serving my country. The things that mattered to me, that gave me purpose, are nowhere to be found. But that's all right. I don't need their recognition anymore. I've earned my place. I've proven myself. I open my suitcase and pull out my military uniform. I run my fingers over the silver eagle insignia, the symbol of my rank, colonel. It's a rank I earned through years of hard work, sacrifice, and determination. No one gave it to me. I didn't inherit it. I earned it. And tomorrow, when I walk into that room, I'll show them that. I'll show them that I'm no longer the little girl they thought would never amount to anything. As I hang the uniform in the closet, the weight of it fills me with a sense of pride, a sense of purpose. I've come so far, and I'm not done yet. Tomorrow, when I face them, I won't just be their daughter. I'll be a woman who has made a name for herself in a world that didn't think she could, and they'll have to see that. They'll have to respect me. And as I lay in bed that night, I think to myself, tomorrow, they'll finally see me for who I am. Tomorrow, they'll see that the path I chose was the right one. And nothing they say or do will ever take that away from me. Throughout my life, my family had never really seen me for who I truly was. Instead, they saw me through a lens of disappointment and unfulfilled expectations. My parents, especially, always had a clear vision for my future, a future that had nothing to do with computers or technology. They envisioned me following in the footsteps of my father, joining the family business, and contributing to the legacy of real estate they had built for decades. That was the future they saw for me, and that was the future they expected. But I didn't see it the same way. While my brother Ethan happily embraced the idea of working in real estate, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something more. The world of technology called to me in a way that real estate never could. I wasn't interested in selling houses or managing properties. I wanted to be part of something bigger, something that could change the way we live, the way we protect ourselves in an increasingly connected world. I wanted to protect data, build security systems, and work with cutting-edge technology that could have a global impact. But to my family, this was a choice that didn't make sense. To them, pursuing a career in technology was unrealistic, unpractical, and certainly not a path worthy of their high expectations. My parents could never understand why I didn't follow the path they laid out for me. Instead of being proud of me for pursuing something I was passionate about, they looked at my decision with nothing but disappointment. The day I told them I was choosing a career in cybersecurity, my father had stared at me in disbelief, as if I had betrayed him. His words still echo in my mind. "Maya, you're smarter than this. Why would you waste your time with something as unstable as technology? You should be building a future with something solid, like real estate." That was the moment I knew I was never going to be good enough in their eyes. I wasn't Ethan. I wasn't following their vision. I wasn't doing what they wanted me to do, and I could see the disappointment on their faces every time they looked at me. It was as if my entire existence, my choices, my passion didn't matter. My dreams were just too far out of their understanding. But the more they dismissed me, the more determined I became. I knew I was capable of more, and I knew that the path I had chosen was the one that would lead me to greatness. While my parents were busy setting up Ethan to take over the family business, I was working late nights, learning everything I could about cybersecurity, battling in a world they didn't even know existed. And slowly, I started to realize that their expectations, their dreams for me, were nothing more than chains holding me back from what I could truly achieve. My achievements in technology weren't acknowledged by my family. They couldn't even bring themselves to be proud of my promotions, my accomplishments, or my rising status in the field of cybersecurity. I earned my position, but all they saw was a mistake. I saw it every time we spoke. My dad always made sure to bring up how proud he was of Ethan's latest accomplishments, but not a single word was spoken about my achievements. It was as if my success was invisible, just because it didn't align with the future they envisioned for me. As time passed, I stopped seeking their approval. I knew it wasn't coming, but I also knew that I didn't need it. The work I was doing, the life I had built, was mine to define. And slowly, the world around me began to recognize my worth. The companies I worked for, the people who saw what I could do, they recognized me. I was making a difference in the world of cybersecurity, and that's what truly mattered. I still remember that day, when I saw Ethan proudly showing off his promotion at the family dinner table. Everyone was celebrating him, talking about how successful he was, how he was going to take over the family business. But I wasn't jealous. I didn't want his life. I didn't want to be the one who followed the predictable path of success in real estate. What I wanted, and what I had already achieved, was something far more fulfilling. I had created my own success, in a world that was mine to conquer. As I walked into the dining room, the familiar scent of my mother's cooking filled the air: spaghetti, garlic bread, and the roast chicken she always made for family dinners. The table was set just like it had been for as long as I could remember, with the same mismatched plates and glassware, the same old wooden chairs. My father sat at the head of the table, as usual, his eyes fixed on his phone as he absent-mindedly scrolled through work emails. My mother was bustling around, placing dishes on the table, her movements mechanical, as if she were going through the motions of a dinner she had made 1,000 times before. Ethan was already seated, of course, smiling in his usual way. Always the golden child. I could see the glint of pride in my father's eyes as he looked at him, as if Ethan's mere presence at the table was some sort of accomplishment. My heart tightened in my chest, but I swallowed the feeling. This was nothing new. This was the way it had always been. I had always been the other child, the one they never quite understood. The one who didn't fit into the neat little box of success they had planned for me. "Ethan, you've been doing amazing with the company," my father began, his voice filled with admiration. "I heard you secured another deal with those new investors. You're really making a name for yourself. You're going to take the business to the next level." Ethan smiled, his usual cocky grin spreading across his face. "Thanks, Dad. It's been a lot of hard work, but I've been pushing the team to deliver results." I could feel my father's words like a sharp knife in my gut. It was always about Ethan, always about his success. The company, the money, the legacy they'd built for him. And where did that leave me? The girl who dared to take a different path. The girl who chose a career in technology instead of real estate. The girl they constantly saw as an outsider, as the failure in the family. I quietly sat down at the table, taking my seat across from my brother. The room fell into a familiar rhythm, a rhythm I had grown used to over the years. The casual chatter about Ethan's latest success, the smug look he always wore when he was praised, and my mother nodding along, her face glowing with pride. I wasn't even sure if they realized how much this stung, how much their words cut into me, how much they still saw me as a failure. "And Maya," my father suddenly said, breaking the flow of the conversation as he glanced at me, "how's your job going?" "Still in that tech thing." I could feel the dismissive tone in his voice, as if he couldn't even remember the exact name of my profession. It wasn't real to him. It never had been. I had told him countless times about my career, how I had risen through the ranks, how I had become a respected cybersecurity expert, but in his eyes, it was nothing. I wasn't involved in the real world like Ethan was. I wasn't building something tangible, something he could see and touch. Yeah, it's going well, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm still working in cybersecurity, and I'm actually handling some major projects now. My mother, who had been quietly dishing out food, finally looked up. Cybersecurity, huh? That's good, she said, her voice flat, almost indifferent. But you know, it's not like the real estate business. You can't build a legacy in computers, can you? She didn't say it with malice, but the implication was clear. To her, my work was something temporary, something that could never compare to the solid, real work Ethan was doing in the family business. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. It was always like this. I had learned not to take it personally over the years, but tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like the last straw. Legacy. I asked, trying to sound casual, but my words came out colder than I expected. What about my legacy, Mom? I'm working on projects that could protect entire countries. I'm working on systems that are crucial for national security. My work isn't just about making money, it's about making a difference. There was a long silence. My father's gaze shifted slightly, as though he wasn't sure how to respond. Ethan looked at me with a half-amused expression, like I was overreacting, and then he turned his attention back to his plate. My mother's face flushed, but she didn't say anything. It was like they couldn't fathom that the work I was doing was as important, or even more important, than anything they had ever been a part of. To them, my career was just something nice, not something that had any real value. Well, my father said, clearing his throat, let's not dwell on that. We're here to celebrate Ethan's success tonight. He reached for his wine glass and raised it. To Ethan, and to all the great work he's doing for the business. We couldn't be prouder. Ethan grinned and raised his glass in response. Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without the team. The toast hung in the air, like a bitter reminder of everything I wasn't. I sat there, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. They still didn't get it. They still saw me as the outsider, the one who had wasted her potential, the one who had chosen the wrong path. And Ethan, their golden boy, would always be the one they praised, the one they saw as the true success. But I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their praise. I had already proved myself in the world they didn't understand. And tomorrow, when they saw who I truly was, when they realized just how far I had come, it wouldn't matter if they acknowledged me or not, because I knew my worth. And someday they would too. As the conversation continued, I sat there quietly, forcing myself to smile. But inside, my mind was racing. My mother's voice still echoed in my ears, praising Ethan as if he were some sort of hero. Every word she spoke about him, every mention of his success, felt like a sharp dagger in my chest. Ethan this, Ethan that, she would say, talking about his latest promotion, his new business ventures, the family legacy he was building. And what about me? What about my accomplishments? My career? My sacrifices? The more I sat there, listening to them talk about Ethan as if he were the pinnacle of success, the more I felt invisible. It was like I had never done anything worthy of acknowledgement, like I was still that little girl in their eyes, the one who didn't follow their plans, the one who was never good enough. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I had worked hard. Really hard. I had earned everything I had achieved, and no matter how much they dismissed it, I couldn't deny the truth. I had built a career that mattered. I had risen through the ranks in a field that was as competitive as it was crucial, protecting the very systems that kept our country safe from the world's most dangerous cyber threats. What I did wasn't just a job, it was essential, and every day I made a difference. Yet here I was, sitting at a dinner table, feeling like I still had to prove my worth to them. The truth hit me hard. I was never going to get the validation I wanted from them. They would never see me as more than the girl who had chosen the wrong path. And that, for some reason, had always been the hardest thing to accept. Maya, why didn't you just stick with real estate? Why didn't you take the easy route like Ethan? The words of my father echoed in my mind. I had heard it all before, and it always stung the same way. They couldn't see what I had built for myself. They couldn't see the years of struggle, the sleepless nights spent trying to protect systems that were invisible to everyone else. To them, all of that didn't matter. All that mattered was the money Ethan brought in, the deals he made, the legacy he was creating in their image. I couldn't keep sitting there, silently taking it. I had to prove them wrong, not just to them but to myself. I had spent too many years trying to seek their approval, trying to measure up to their expectations. But now, I was done. I didn't need their approval anymore. What I needed was to show them who I had become, not who they thought I was. I clenched my fists under the table, the anger simmering inside of me. This was it. Tomorrow, they would see me. Tomorrow, they would finally realize that I had succeeded, and not in the way they ever expected. I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. I had built something real, something they could never understand, and it was time for them to see that. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about rubbing my success in their faces. It was about finally being recognized for who I truly was. I wasn't the little girl who had disappointed them anymore. I was Maya Carter, a leader in cybersecurity, and I had earned the respect of the world I lived in. Tomorrow, when they saw me in action, when they realized the role I played in the projects they worked on, they would finally understand. They would have to acknowledge what I had done. I would no longer be the failure in their eyes. I would show them what real success looked like. I would show them that I was the one who had truly succeeded. As I sat there at the dinner table, watching my family continue to praise Ethan and ignore everything I had accomplished, a thought gnawed at me. They had no idea what was truly happening in the world of business and technology, especially within the very company they cherished so much. It was almost laughable how little they understood about the work I did, about the danger, and the significance of the projects I managed. I didn't just work in cybersecurity. I was the director of security for a national military project worth billions. A project that my family's company, Pinnacle Real Estate, was unknowingly entangled with. The technology they were developing for the military, systems that were supposed to be cutting-edge, state-of-the-art, was actually being manipulated. While they focused on their latest real estate deals, blissfully unaware of the vast implications of their work, I was buried in something far more important. My career in cybersecurity had led me to the most dangerous discovery I had ever made. Pinnacle's cutting-edge technology was being exploited by a powerful rival organization, one that I had uncovered during my work as the lead security liaison for this military project. I had spent the last several months meticulously auditing our systems, ensuring that everything was protected and that our national defense assets were safe from cyber threats. But somewhere along the line, I started noticing suspicious activity, small anomalies in the data, patterns that didn't align with what we had been led to believe. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it was just a minor glitch in the system. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized the truth. Someone had infiltrated our network, someone had compromised our data, and the company that had been so proud of its military contracts was being used against itself. The pieces fell into place one by one: unusual transactions, data breaches, odd behavior from some of the contractors we worked with. These weren't mistakes, they were deliberate. The rival organization had set its sights on Pinnacle, slowly and quietly working their way into the heart of our military projects. They had targeted our weakest points, used inside knowledge to manipulate our technology, and now, they were about to steal everything we had worked for. The hardest part of all this, the fact that my family had no clue, they were celebrating Ethan's success, completely oblivious to the fact that their beloved business was under attack. And even worse, it was the very technology they were so proud of, technology that, in the wrong hands, could have devastating consequences. As I stood up from the dinner table, my thoughts raced. I had to act. This wasn't just about protecting a company. This was about protecting the nation. I had been trusted with the security of some of the most critical systems in the world, and I couldn't let them fall into the wrong hands. But what was even more frustrating was that my family didn't even realize that I was the one fighting this battle. They still saw me as just the girl who didn't follow their plan, the one who chose a career they thought was unrealistic. Yet, here I was, holding the key to stopping a potential disaster. I thought about telling them. I thought about coming clean, telling them that the very company they had built was under threat. But would they even believe me? Would they ever accept the fact that their precious company was the target of something so much bigger than their real estate deals? As I left the table, I made a decision. I couldn't tell them now. I had to finish what I started, uncover the full extent of this infiltration, and protect the systems I was entrusted with. Only once I had completed this mission would I be able to come back and tell them the truth, not because I needed their approval, but because they would finally see the reality of my success. I had fought for recognition, I had fought for my place in this world, and now I was fighting for something far bigger. My work was no longer just about proving myself to my family, it was about ensuring the safety of a nation, about stopping an enemy they had no idea even existed. Tomorrow, when I walked back into that boardroom, I wouldn't just be the disappointing daughter anymore. I'd be the one who saved them all. The more I dug into the anomalies within the system, the clearer it became. This wasn't a random attack or an isolated security breach. It wasn't even an outsider attempting to exploit a weak point. No, the threat was far more insidious, far closer to home than I ever could have imagined. I had always thought that my family, especially my father, was a man of integrity. I had believed that their business, Pinnacle Real Estate, was built on trust, on relationships, on hard work. But as I traced the suspicious activity back through the data logs, I found something that stopped me cold in my tracks. A series of encrypted files, all marked with an unfamiliar identifier. The more I pieced the data together, the more I began to see something I hadn't expected. Pinnacle wasn't just under attack, we were actively participating in a scheme to leak sensitive information. The company that I had once called home, the company my father had built, had somehow been collaborating with one of our fiercest competitors in the cybersecurity industry. This competitor had been quietly siphoning information, vital military technology, from the very systems I was entrusted to protect. But it wasn't just a corporate rivalry, this was personal. It was like a betrayal that cut deeper than anything I had experienced. I sat in my office late into the night, trying to piece together the puzzle. The information they were leaking was incredibly sensitive. It wasn't just about software updates or system patches. This was about cutting-edge defense technology, military-grade encryption algorithms, and cyber defense systems that could protect entire nations. I had spent years working on this technology, safeguarding it, ensuring that it remained secure, that it was impervious to external threats. But now, I was staring at a series of files that proved that my family's company had been working hand-in-hand with an adversary in the industry to undermine everything I had worked for. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The fact that Pinnacle was involved in this didn't just shock me, it shattered me. My father, the man who had always preached about loyalty, honor, and trust, was directly involved with a rival company in the cybersecurity sector, one that was actively seeking to undermine national security by stealing our technology. And somehow, this information had been funneled to them through the very systems I managed. At that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't just a corporate espionage case. It was a family betrayal. My father, the man I had always looked up to, had knowingly partnered with a rival company in the security industry. He had allowed them to use Pinnacle as a backdoor into the very technology I had been protecting, exploiting my role as the liaison between the military and our company. I felt a rush of betrayal flood my chest. The man who had taught me to trust my instincts, the man who had always preached about hard work and building a legacy, had been orchestrating the very thing I had spent my career trying to prevent. I wasn't just fighting external threats anymore. I was fighting against the very people I had trusted the most, the people who had helped me get to where I am, and now, it seemed, they were ready to destroy everything I had built. I stood up and paced around my office, trying to process everything. It was as if the ground had been ripped out from under me. How had it all happened? Had my father known about the rival company's involvement from the beginning, or had he been manipulated into working with them? There were too many questions, too many variables. But one thing was certain: the company I thought I had been working for was now a target, and the very people I had trusted had been pulling the strings. I needed to confront this head-on. I couldn't allow this to continue. The risks were too high, not just for me, but for everyone involved. This wasn't just about corporate loyalty anymore. It was about national security, about protecting our country from the very forces that sought to tear it apart. The enemy was no longer just external. It was inside, at the heart of the company I had once called my own. But the most gut-wrenching part: my father didn't even know the full extent of the damage he had caused. He had been so caught up in his pride, in the success of his business, that he had become blind to the consequences of his actions. He had placed his trust in the wrong hands, and now the consequences were far beyond anything he or I could have imagined. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became. I was no longer just fighting to protect my career or my reputation. I was fighting for the truth. I had to bring this to light, even if it meant exposing the darkest parts of my own family. The world needed to know, and I would make sure it did. Tomorrow, when I stood in front of my family, I wasn't just going to be the daughter who had been rejected. I was going to be the woman who tore through the lies, the one who uncovered the truth, no matter how ugly it was. And once the truth was out, nothing would ever be the same again. As the weight of my discovery settled in, a cold determination washed over me. This wasn't just about proving my family wrong anymore. It wasn't about proving to them that I wasn't a failure, that my career wasn't a mistake. No, it was bigger than that. Far bigger. I had spent years feeling dismissed, underestimated, and belittled by the people who were supposed to support me. My father, my mother, they had always treated my success as irrelevant, as something unworthy of their attention. Ethan had always been their golden boy, the one they expected to lead their legacy. But what had happened was far more than just a personal slight. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than anything they could have imagined. And the truth was, my family had no idea the kind of mess they had gotten themselves into. It wasn't just about their disregard for me anymore. It was about national security. It was about the lives I was working to protect through my work in cybersecurity. The secrets that were being leaked weren't just pieces of corporate data. They were military-grade defense systems, the very systems that kept our country safe. The very systems that I had worked tirelessly to secure, only to have them compromised from within by the very people I had trusted most. My own family was involved, willingly or not, in a dangerous game they could never fully comprehend. At that moment, I knew I had no choice. I couldn't just let this slide. I couldn't allow this betrayal to continue unchecked, not when the stakes were this high. If I walked away now, if I stayed silent, the damage would be irreparable. The lives at risk were too important, and the consequences of inaction were too great. It wasn't just my career on the line, it was the safety of the entire nation. I had spent so many years trying to get their approval. For too long, I let their disapproval shape me. But now, I realized the real battle wasn't about seeking their acceptance. It was about fighting for the truth. It was about protecting the very thing I had sworn to defend when I first enlisted. It was about ensuring that the systems I had spent my life perfecting didn't fall into the wrong hands. And the enemy wasn't just some faceless corporation. The enemy was much closer to home. As much as it stung to acknowledge the truth, I had to face it. My family's company, the very place that had nurtured me as a child, had become part of the problem, not the solution. They had gotten too greedy, too comfortable, and now they were being used by forces that wanted to destroy everything I had worked for. They didn't understand the consequences of their actions, and they never would unless I showed them. So I made my decision. I wasn't going to get back at them for all the years they dismissed me. That wouldn't be enough. The stakes were too high. This wasn't about personal satisfaction anymore. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about protecting the very systems that could mean life or death for innocent people. And I couldn't let this corruption continue. I had always been taught that family came first, that loyalty to those you love should never be broken. But in this case, loyalty had become a liability. My loyalty was to the truth, to the systems I had sworn to protect, and to the security of my country. That was where my allegiance lay now. I couldn't let the fear of family judgment, or their dismissal of my choices, stop me from doing what needed to be done. I couldn't allow my father's pride, my mother's indifference, or Ethan's smirking face to blind me to the reality of the situation. They had made their choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. And this time, the consequences would not be just personal, they would affect the future of everything we had fought for. The day of the event arrived faster than I expected. It was the kind of event my father had been planning for months, a grand, important gathering to showcase the progress of the military project Pinnacle Real Estate was involved in. And as always, it would be a celebration of Ethan's success, of his leadership within the family business. But this time, I wasn't just going as the daughter who had been overlooked all these years. This time, I wasn't just a silent observer at the family table. I was walking into this event as Maya Carter, Director of Cybersecurity for a national defense project worth billions of dollars. A project my family's company had no idea was at the center of a massive security breach. I wasn't there to quietly sit in the background, pretending that my family still saw me as the girl who made the wrong choice. No, today I was there to show them who I had become, to show them how far I had come, and to make them see me for the first time as something more than just the failure they had always believed me to be. As I pulled up to the venue, a sleek, modern building nestled in the heart of the city, I could already feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just any event. It was a high-stakes, high-profile gathering, one where military leaders and corporate executives would be in attendance. It was the perfect opportunity for me to reveal the truth, to confront the corruption that had quietly festered within my family's company and its ties to a rival organization. But more than that, it was my chance to finally make my mark, to stand tall as a leader in my field, not just the daughter of the man who ran this company, but as a force to be reckoned with in the cybersecurity world. I walked into the grand conference hall with a sense of resolve, my uniform crisp, the silver eagle insignia of my colonel rank gleaming in the spotlight. The whispers around me started the moment I entered. There were a few surprised glances, some inquisitive stares, but I didn't care. I wasn't here for their approval anymore. I was here to show them my authority, to remind them that I wasn't just some side character in their story. My father, of course, was at the center of the event, his usual air of pride and confidence evident as he spoke with the company's executives and military officers. He looked up and smiled when he saw me, but there was a faint confusion in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in him before. Why was his daughter in uniform? Why was she here as a guest of honor? "Maya, I didn't realize you'd be attending today," my father said, trying to mask his surprise behind a forced smile. "You're here for the presentation, aren't you?" I nodded, my eyes meeting his. For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch under his gaze. "Actually, I'm here as the Director of Cybersecurity for the National Defense Project that Pinnacle is working on. I'll be overseeing the briefing today." There it was, the truth. The truth that had been hidden from them for so long. His face faltered for just a moment, and I could feel the weight of the realization hit him. This wasn't some junior officer or low-ranking consultant showing up for a family event. This was Maya Carter, Colonel, and I wasn't just here as a formality. I was here because I held the keys to the very project that he and the company had been so proud of, a project that was now at risk because of the very compromises they had unknowingly been a part of. I could see the shift in the room as people around me started to realize who I was and what I represented. Military officers, contractors, executives, all of them had heard of me. They had heard of my work, of my reputation, of the cybersecurity systems I had helped develop to protect not just national defense systems, but critical infrastructures all over the world. They knew who I was. And for the first time, I felt their respect. It was a strange sensation, especially considering that just a few years ago, I had never expected any of them to see me as anything more than a failure in my family's eyes. As the event kicked off, I stood at the front, ready to present. I watched my father smile and clap his hands as the project managers began their usual speeches about real estate developments and their upcoming milestones. But I knew what the real story was. I knew what the real stakes were. Finally, it was my turn. I walked up to the podium, the eyes of the room on me. As I looked across the sea of familiar faces, my father, the executives from Pinnacle military officials, and my brother, Ethan, standing proudly with his business suit and confident demeanor, I felt a rush of adrenaline. This wasn't just another corporate presentation. This wasn't just a family dinner where I had been ignored and dismissed for so long. This was my moment. "My name is Maya Carter," I began, my voice steady and clear, "and I'm here to give you an update on the security protocols and the status of Project Aegis, the military defense project Pinnacle has been collaborating on." I paused for a moment, letting the weight of my words sink in. I could see my father's face tighten, his proud smile fading as he realized this wasn't going to be the typical presentation. He didn't know what was coming. "The technology you're working on," I continued, "is cutting edge, but it's also at risk. And I have just discovered a breach within our systems, one that involves not just external hackers but internal manipulation. This project, the one you've been so proud of, is being compromised. And it's not by an outside enemy. It's because of collaboration with a rival company in the cybersecurity industry, a company that's been exploiting Pinnacle's position for their own gain." I felt the room go still. My father's expression twisted with confusion and shock, while Ethan's face turned pale. The truth was now out in the open. They had no idea what was happening behind closed doors. But I didn't stop there. I pressed forward, revealing the evidence of the infiltration and the extent of the breach. I explained the vulnerability that had been exploited, the rival company's involvement, and the imminent threat to national security. I watched as the room of powerful men and women slowly shifted, eyes darting between each other, processing the magnitude of what I had just said. And as I looked at my father, I could see it, the dawning realization that everything they had built was at risk because of their ignorance. When I finished, the room was silent. I could hear my father's voice tremble as he finally spoke. "Maya, I had no idea. I had no idea." And in that moment, I realized something. It wasn't just about proving myself anymore. It wasn't just about showing them how far I had come. It was about ensuring that the systems I had fought so hard to protect were safe, and that the betrayal I had uncovered would not be ignored. I wasn't just Maya, the girl who had been cast aside. I wasn't just the daughter they thought would fail. Today, I had shown them what true strength was, and when I left that event, I knew one thing for sure: I had finally earned their respect. Not through their approval, but through the truth. The room had fallen into an eerie silence after my revelation. The eyes of every executive, every military officer, were locked on me, trying to process what I had just exposed. The truth hung in the air like a dense fog, and I could see the slow dawning of realization on my father's face. My voice, steady but with an edge of steel, cut through the quiet. "As I mentioned earlier," I continued, "the breach is not just external. It's internal, and infiltration that runs deeper than anyone here realizes." I paused, letting my words sink in. "The very company you trust, the one that has been at the heart of all your dealings, is collaborating with a rival company in the cybersecurity industry. And that's not just a minor conflict, it's a blatant betrayal that threatens everything Pinnacle has worked for." My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting around the room, probably searching for an escape from the storm I had just unleashed. But there was no escape. He had built his career on this company, and now, everything he had worked for was on the verge of collapsing under the weight of his own actions. He couldn't hide from it anymore. The secret I had uncovered wasn't just a breach of cybersecurity. It was a personal betrayal that involved his own company, his own legacy. I watched as the realization sunk in deeper, especially on my father's face. He was a man who had always prided himself on his ability to control everything, to steer the ship with precision. But now, he was faced with the undeniable truth that his empire, the one he had built brick by brick, was under threat not just from the outside, but from within, by people he trusted the most. By me, by his own flesh and blood. You've been spying on us. My father finally choked out, his voice thick with disbelief. He couldn't process it. I could see the man who had always held the upper hand, always in control, now crumbling under the weight of his own mistakes. "How could you do this?" he muttered, the anger in his tone mixing with a sense of betrayal. "It's not just spying, Dad," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. "It's much worse. The technology you've been developing, the very contracts you've been boasting about, are being sold to the highest bidder. This is corporate espionage on a level I've never seen before, and you've been a part of it." The shock in the room was palpable. Every face in the room, from the military officers to the corporate leaders, had turned pale. They knew the consequences of such a revelation. They understood that the situation I had just uncovered went far beyond simple corporate mismanagement. The public would have a field day with this. If this news got out, if the press found out about the secret collaboration, the espionage, it would destroy Pinnacle's reputation in an instant. There was a hushed murmur around the room as the gravity of what I had just said started to settle in. The people who had once admired my father now saw him in a new light, a man who had been hiding a dirty secret. A man who had, perhaps unknowingly, put national security at risk for the sake of business deals. And they knew, just as I did, that the public would never let this slide. The media would tear them apart, and the fallout would be catastrophic. "Dad," I said softly, feeling a wave of emotion surge inside me, "you may have built an empire, but it's built on lies and betrayal. And now, the world is going to know about it." The reality hit him like a punch to the gut. His empire, built on years of hard work and dedication, was now on the brink of being exposed for what it really was: a facade. My father, the man who had always been untouchable, was about to be shamed in front of the world. His reputation, his career, everything he had built, was now in jeopardy. I watched his face twist with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and panic. For the first time in my life, I saw him as vulnerable. And it made me realize something. I had spent so many years trying to live up to his expectations, trying to prove my worth to him, and here I was, the one who was now going to destroy everything he had worked for. But this wasn't just about him. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about exposing the truth, and about making sure that the technology I had spent my career safeguarding didn't fall into the wrong hands. "Do you realize what this means?" One of the executives spoke up, his voice shaking. "If this leaks, if the media gets hold of this, the company will collapse, our clients will pull out, we'll lose everything." The weight of the situation was dawning on them now. It wasn't just a corporate scandal, it was a national security issue, one that could bring down a multi-billion-dollar business. I could see my father struggle to come to terms with the situation. His face turned pale as the reality of what was at stake finally sunk in. The betrayal I had uncovered wasn't just a family issue. It was a public affair, one that could tear apart not just Pinnacle, but everything his family had stood for. "Do you know what you've done?" My father finally hissed, his voice trembling with anger and fear. "You've ruined us. You've ruined everything." His eyes were filled with rage, but I saw something else too, a sense of regret, of fear. He was finally realizing the extent of the damage that had been done. But I didn't flinch. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. This wasn't about saving face for anyone. This wasn't about protecting the family name. This was about doing what was right. And what was right was making sure that the truth came to light. As the weight of my revelations settled into the room, I turned my gaze to my father, my mother, and Ethan. Their faces were a mix of shock, disbelief, and confusion, expressions I had longed to see for years. It was the reaction I had been waiting for, the moment when they would realize that I wasn't the person they had always dismissed, the person they had written off as a failure. But as I stared into their eyes, I felt something unexpected wash over me, a strange sense of freedom rather than satisfaction. I had spent my entire life fighting for recognition from these people. I had endured their judgment, their neglect, their constant comparisons to Ethan, and their failure to see me for the woman I had become. But now, as I watched them struggle to process the truth I had just exposed, I didn't feel a rush of victory or vindication. Instead, I felt detached, like I was finally free from the chains they had placed around me. The anger that had once fueled me, that had driven me to prove myself, now felt distant. It was as if I had released all of it, released the need for their approval, the desire for their validation. My father's face was pale, his mouth slightly agape as the truth sank in. His pride had been shattered, his control slipping away from him, and for the first time in years, I saw him as something other than my father. I saw him as just another person who had failed to see the full picture, who had underestimated the very thing I had fought for all along. And yet, despite the chaos in his eyes, I didn't feel any satisfaction. His disappointment in me wasn't something I could celebrate anymore. It no longer held the power it once did. My mother, always so quick to defend Ethan, stood frozen. I saw the usual air of denial creeping into her expression as she tried to process the impact of my words. Her eyes darted between me and my father, but there was no apology, no recognition of how much I had sacrificed to get here. It was as though she couldn't bear to admit that her version of the truth had been wrong all along. Ethan, on the other hand, looked downright shocked, his usual smug smile replaced by a look of genuine confusion. He had never seen me like this before, strong, resolute, and in control. For the first time, I could tell he was scared, not just of me, but of the power I had over the situation. He had always been the golden child, the one who got all the praise, the one who never had to prove himself. But now, he was the one who was being held accountable for his actions, for the blind allegiance he had to a company that, unbeknownst to him, had become part of a much larger, more dangerous game. As I watched their faces, something inside me clicked. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I wasn't even hoping they'd finally see me for who I truly was. What I had just done wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them feel what I had felt for years. It was about freedom. It was about taking control of my own story, my own identity. For so long, I had been trapped by their expectations, by their disappointment. But now I was free from that. I had earned my place in the world, not because they finally understood me, but because I understood myself. The silence stretched on, and I could hear the shakiness in my father's voice when he finally spoke. "Maya, this is impossible. How could you do this to us?" But his question didn't sting anymore. In fact, it was almost comical. He couldn't understand, and he never would. I didn't respond right away. I simply watched them, letting the silence speak for itself. I was no longer the daughter who had to apologize for her choices. I was no longer the one who had to beg for their acceptance. The power was now in my hands, and it was freeing in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about having the upper hand or being able to expose their secrets. It was about knowing that I was the one in control now, that the narrative of my life was mine to write, not theirs to dictate. Their reactions, the shock in their eyes, didn't satisfy me. They simply made me realize something far more profound. I had been chasing after their approval for so long, and in doing so, I had given up my own sense of self. But now I was free. I was no longer bound by their judgments or their expectations. For the first time in my life, I was truly free to be who I was meant to be. And with that freedom came power. The power to change the game, the power to shape my own future, and the power to protect what mattered most. My work wasn't about seeking approval anymore. It was about doing what was right, about ensuring that the technology I had fought so hard to protect didn't fall into the wrong hands. I stood taller, more confident than ever. "You've lost, Dad," I said softly, my voice steady. "You've lost not just the company, but your integrity. and no matter what happens from here, you'll never get that back. It wasn't a declaration of victory. It was a statement of freedom. As I walked away from that moment, I didn't feel anger or bitterness. I felt a deep sense of relief. The chains that had held me for so long had finally broken, and for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need them to define who I was. For years, I had been the disappointment, the one who didn't fit in with their vision, the one who chose a different path and in their eyes wasted her potential. My father, my mother, even Ethan, they had always looked at me with that same disapproving gaze, the kind that told me I was never enough. They saw me as someone who had taken the easy way out, choosing the military and technology over a secure future in the family business. They could never understand why I chose to leave everything behind, why I didn't want to follow in their footsteps. But today, everything had changed. Standing there, in that room, facing my family as they came to terms with the truth I had just revealed, I felt something shift deep within me. I had expected this moment for years, the moment when they would finally understand. But this wasn't about getting their approval. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about something far more profound. It was about proving to myself that I had been right all along, that the choice I made, the path I carved out for myself, was the right one. I had spent so much time fighting to be seen, to be heard, to be recognized. I had lived in their shadow for years, constantly measuring my worth by their standards, by their expectations. But today, as I stood before them, I realized something. I wasn't fighting for their approval anymore. This wasn't about revenge or spite. It was about my own journey, my own sense of fulfillment. The truth was, I had already won, long before this moment. The fact that they couldn't see it didn't change anything. I didn't need them to validate me. I didn't need their approval to feel like I was enough. I had already proved my worth in the real world. I had already achieved things they could never even comprehend. In that room, I wasn't just the daughter who had chosen the wrong path anymore. I wasn't the girl who had been told that she wasn't good enough. I was the one who had built something real, something meaningful, and something that would have a lasting impact on the world. The idea of revenge never really appealed to me. What I wanted, what I had always wanted, was for them to see me as I was, not as some failure they had to fix, but as someone who had fought for what she believed in, who had sacrificed everything to follow her passion, and who had succeeded in a world that had once seemed so out of reach. This wasn't about humiliating them or making them feel guilty for not supporting me. This was about proving to them, and more importantly to myself, that I had done the right thing from the start. For years, I had lived with the belief that if I just worked hard enough, if I just proved my worth, they would see me for who I truly was. But I had spent so much time chasing their approval that I hadn't realized the most important thing. I didn't need it. Today, I had shown them who I had become. And in doing so, I had finally given myself the freedom to let go of their judgment, to embrace who I was, and more importantly, who I had always been meant to be. I had chosen a path that made sense to me, not to them. And no matter what happened from this moment on, I knew one thing for sure: I had made the right choice. I had built a career based on my own passions and abilities, not on what they thought I should do. And the truth was, I was proud of it. So as I stood there, watching them struggle to process the gravity of what I had revealed, I realized that their opinions no longer mattered. The weight of their disappointment no longer had any hold on me. I had already done what I set out to do. And now, I would walk away from this moment not with a sense of revenge or vindication, but with a sense of freedom, knowing that I had finally proven to myself that I was right. The days that followed the event were a whirlwind of media coverage, internal investigations, and corporate fallout. Pinnacle Real Estate, once proud of its business ventures and familial legacy, was now at the center of a public scandal that threatened to unravel everything they had worked for. The truth was out, and despite their attempts to cover it up, the damage had been done. My father's company was implicated in a secret collaboration with a rival cybersecurity firm, one that had been exploiting the very technologies we had been developing for national defense. But I didn't revel in their downfall. I wasn't interested in seeing my family crumble. This wasn't about revenge. It was about something far deeper, justice. The truth had needed to come to light, not just for my own peace of mind, but for the integrity of the work I had spent years building. This was never about seeing my family suffer for their mistakes. It was about showing them, and the world, that I had earned my place, that I had done what was right, and in the process, protected something much bigger than myself. The security of the nation. In the aftermath, my father called me. He wanted to meet. I could hear the regret in his voice, a tone I had never heard before. For once, I wasn't the one seeking his approval. For once, it was him who had to face the consequences of his actions. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. I didn't feel any rush of satisfaction that I had exposed the truth. It was a heavy burden, one that had cost more than I had anticipated. Sitting across from him in the office, the tension was thick. He looked at me differently now, no longer the man who had once dismissed me, but a man who had been forced to confront the reality of the situation. "Maya," he began, his voice softer than I remembered, I was wrong. I should have never let things go this far. You were right." The words were hard for him to say, but I didn't feel the need to press him further. The damage had already been done, and the truth had prevailed. "I don't need your apology, Dad," I said quietly. "I never did this for your approval. I did it because it was the right thing to do." I knew he understood. I could see the weight of my actions finally hitting him. The family name, the company, everything was at risk, and it was my actions that had prevented an even greater catastrophe. I had made sure that the technologies we developed, the defense systems meant to protect national security, didn't fall into the wrong hands. Over the following weeks, Pinnacle underwent a complete overhaul. Investigations were launched, executives were replaced, and new safeguards were put in place. My family, though still trying to navigate the fallout, began to see the significance of my role, not just as their daughter, but as someone who had helped protect the integrity of the work they had been so proud of. They couldn't erase the past, but they could acknowledge the importance of what I had done. The media, once quick to scrutinize, now had no choice but to recognize my contribution. What started as a family secret, a hidden betrayal, had turned into a story of integrity, courage, and unwavering truth. I hadn't just exposed a corporate scandal, I had preserved the security of the very systems I had spent years safeguarding. And while the world began to see me for what I truly was, a leader in cybersecurity, a woman who had fought for what was right, I didn't need their praise. I didn't need their validation. What mattered was the peace I now felt, knowing that I had protected my own integrity, defended my values, and ultimately secured the future of the country I had dedicated my life to. My family had always looked at me as the one who didn't measure up, the one who chose the wrong path. But now, when they looked at me, they saw something different. They saw someone who had followed her own way, and in doing so, had saved more than just a company. I had protected our national security, ensured that the technology I had helped develop would remain in safe hands, and in the process, earned my place, not just in their eyes, but in the eyes of the world. As I walked away from that moment, I didn't feel the need to say anything more. The truth had already been spoken. The only thing left for me to do was to continue doing what I had always done, protecting what mattered, proving to myself that I had made the right choice. All along, this wasn't a story about revenge. It was a story about truth, about standing up for what was right, even when the world and your own family didn't see it at first. And in the end, justice was served. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized something important. There were times, many times, when I had waited for recognition, when I had hoped that my family would finally see me for who I was, for what I had accomplished. For years, I struggled under the weight of their expectations, trying to meet their standards, hoping that one day, they would finally understand the path I had chosen. But in the end, I learned a valuable lesson. You can't wait for validation from others. The truth is, the most important approval you'll ever get is your own. For so long, I allowed myself to be defined by their disappointment. I let their views of me shape how I saw myself, how I valued my own achievements. But as the dust settled, as I stood there, finally confident, finally at peace, I realized something profound. Success is the best form of revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong or getting them to acknowledge my worth. It wasn't about winning a fight or getting the last word. It was about knowing, deep down, that I had made the right choice all along. That the path I took wasn't wrong, wasn't a failure, it was my path. And in the end, I succeeded on my own terms. What I've learned is that sometimes the greatest revenge is living well, living with integrity, and standing by the choices you make. It wasn't about forcing my family to see my success. It was about showing them who I was through my actions, through my work, through my ability to protect what mattered most. The more I tried to gain their approval, the more I lost sight of the fact that I didn't need it. And here's the thing I didn't realize for so long. It's not about them seeing you for who you are. Sometimes, the most important thing is for you to see yourself for who you truly are. When you stop waiting for others to recognize your worth, that's when you finally step into your true power. That's when you understand that your success speaks for itself. At the end of the day, this was never about my family accepting me or recognizing the value of my career. This was about me recognizing my own worth, standing by my decisions, and knowing that I am enough, no matter what anyone else thinks. It's about knowing that I have built something real, something I'm proud of, and knowing that nobody can take that away. The most powerful thing I've learned through all of this is that you don't need to prove yourself to anyone. The proof is in the success. And in the end, it's not the acknowledgement of others that matters most. It's knowing that you've done what you believe in, that you've stuck to your principles, and that you've built a future based on what matters to you. Sometimes, it takes stepping out of the shadow of others to finally see yourself in the light. And when you do, you realize that the only opinion that truly matters is your own. The rest, it'll follow, and if it doesn't, that's okay too, because success, true success, is when you can stand on your own without needing anyone else to validate your journey. So my lesson, trust the path you've chosen, trust your decisions, and know that the biggest revenge is succeeding and doing so on your own terms. And sometimes, letting the world see who you really are is the most powerful thing you can do. That's where the true victory lies.